I first want to say that I sincerely apologize for not making any content in recent time. I've just been bombarded with work, and I've also been kind of watching the World Cup, and I've not been watching that much hockey lately. I'm really fixated on the World Cup right now, which is coming to an end. So we're coming back into the hockey grind, and a few days ago we heard from a former Leafs player and now a media personality show host, Mike Johnson, who stirred the pot full of rumors that the Leafs were interested in trading for some assets and that Bo Horvat of the Canucks was one of them. Now, let's just dissect the details of this because there could very well be a trade with the Leafs and a trade with Bo Horvat. So let's just kind of see how well this could maybe go if they were put together. I personally think that Dubas should go after this guy, considering that he's, I guess, somewhat of a power forward. He's 6 feet tall, 215 pounds. And the best part is that he's entering his prime right now. He is 27 years old. And what's even better about this guy is that he's going to be a pending free agent at the end of the season, and he hasn't been around for any sort of negotiations with Vancouver about his contract. And not just that, but he's actually doing very well this season. He scored 20 goals in 27 games so far this year, which is remarkable considering that he's only trailing Connor McDavid, Jason Robertson, and Tage Thompson, which is pretty good considering that he hasn't been the guy who, was always known to be a super big goal scorer, as he's been stuck between the 30s and 20s range mostly for goals. But here we are, 1/4 into the season, and he's already at 20, which is pretty neat if you ask me. Back to the Leafs, they could very well go for the captain at the March 3rd trade deadline if he's not signed to an extension, which most likely seems to be the case as the Canucks have loaded themselves with some good and bad contracts. They have the Elias Pettersson contract that's going to end in 2 years. He's making $7.35 million right now. The Quinn Hughes contract takes up 9.5% of their salary cap as he's getting paid $7.85 million. And then there's the OEL contract, and boy, does that contract stink. And then, of course, the JT Miller extension that happened this summer. So the Canucks, they basically have zero salary cap space right now, which is kind of an issue if you ask me because, well, obviously they can't re-sign Bo Horvat, and trading Brock Besser really doesn't help because he's young and his contract value cannot be really used to justify for Horvat, considering if Horvat does sign an extension, it's most likely going to be the last contract he signs in his career. I mean, I'd assume the Canucks lock him up long term and they keep him in Vancouver until he retires, which would be a pretty nice thing to see, but it will not happen unless they give up a guy like OEL, which is not likely going to be the case, or Brock Besser, which could very well be the case. Right now, at this time of recording, the Canucks have not made any trades with any of the guys I just talked about, so this remains a rumor. The thing is, Toronto is absolutely stacked with prospects, and they have a fair share of first-round picks, which could definitely make a team like Vancouver interested. Dubas has hit jackpot on some of the trades he's made, but he has missed on others. And he's missed a lot when it comes to acquiring captains for some reason. I don't know if he's just like, hey, look, this guy's a captain, let's get him, like he did with the Foligno trade. I mean, trading for Foligno did absolutely nothing for the Leafs, as he was pretty much just notable for fighting Corey Perry. That's about it. But we should not assume that Dubas will stay quiet this year. He's been active for the past 2 seasons at the deadline, getting all sorts of veteran players. Don't be surprised if he goes for Horvat. So now let's just talk about the names of the players we may see getting traded for one another between these two Canadian rivals. Of course, there's Bo Horvat heading to Toronto, but who will be sent in exchange? When we take a look at the Leafs farm system, we see that they have some pretty decent prospects, starting off with a few guys like Fraser Minton or Pontus Holmberg, maybe Alex Steeves or Ty Voigt. I mean, the possibilities are essentially endless, but just think about it if he's able to acquire Bo Horvat without having to give up Topi Nimila or, of course, Matthew Nyes. I don't really know how to pronounce that. With that being said, it still seems like a first-round pick is needed to even get the attention of Patrick Alvin and the Canucks. I personally think that Holmberg makes sense for Toronto to give away, as we're looking at a guy who had 4 points with the Leafs and 4 points with the Marlies this year, but take a look at his stats last year with the Vax Joe Lakers as a loner, 11 goals and 30 assists totaling 41 points. And not to mention that he was decent in junior, having put up 65 points with the VIK Vastras HK U16 team back in the 2014-15 season. So this guy may have some upside for the Canucks, who are a relatively unknown team on the current status map. They aren't necessarily contenders because they're in a really competitive Pacific Division. I mean, there are so many contenders out there. There's Vegas, there's LA, Calgary, Edmonton, and Seattle. There are so many teams competing for playoff spots there, and they're not necessarily tanking either, as they have started to win some games this year. So we're honestly not too sure where they're ending up, and we don't really know where they're headed. And at 23 years of age, Holmberg could definitely attract the Canucks, who could use him as the team's third-line center for the foreseeable future. Going back to Toronto, however, we need to see aggression from Dubas. They need an impact player ASAP, and whether that be Erik Karlsson or Bo Horvat or whoever, it needs to happen before or during the trade deadline and not the offseason. Why, you guys may ask? Well, the clock is ticking on Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner's time in Toronto, as both of them are going to be due for huge contracts very, very soon, and both will take up more than 30% of the Leafs cap space if they choose to sign in Toronto for a long time. So the Leafs, they have to prove something to both these guys that, they're willing to stay in Toronto. If they keep losing in the first round, your chances of having Matthews and Marner stay are not impossible, but they will go down a little bit. This has to be the year where things change. We've seen how secondary scoring is a major problem for this team, and that leads us to talking about that second power play unit. I mean, Alex Kerfoot and Pierre Engvall, are you kidding me? Yeah, I know they have Bunting and Giordano on that second power play unit, but that will not be sufficient enough to get them to where they want. Their most talented players are already on the first power play unit, and so getting Horvat is the type of guy you would want in all situations. He's very good in the 200-foot game. He's a very good 200-foot player, and he's a type of player that can push a team that's been struggling for some time over that obstacle. With surprisingly good goaltending and defensive play, the Leafs have surprised tons of people. And we already know how with surprising good goaltending and defensive play, this team has shocked tons of people. They've been dealing with a ton of injuries in the past, and it continues to pile up. But hey, they sit third in the league right now when it comes to goals against per game, and I completely agree with Mike Johnson on how Horvat should be the number one target for the Leafs right now, rather than guys like Erik Karlsson or Josh Anderson. And for the Canucks, I mean, they've been all over the news for the wrong reason since signing JT Miller to that mega extension. The team hasn't been able to close out games, and they have Bruce Boudreau, who at this point is a lame duck. No one really knows where he's going to be next year. And there's also a ton of trade speculations on not just Horvat, but on Brock Boeser. Now, Boeser could easily be the guy the Leafs need, and it would be a perfect story for Toronto. I know, I get it. But Horvat is the better guy, considering he's the guy who would slide in perfectly on that third line, but also move up on wing to play with Tavares and Mitch Marner, who, by the way, speaking of Mitch Marner, he played with Horvat in juniors for the London Knights and could definitely find chemistry with him again. With Boeser, it would be really hard considering he would want top 6 minutes and he may not get that in Toronto. So right now it's safe to say that Vancouver is in a bad situation. Toronto, not so much. Instead of trading Horvat and Boeser, the team should try to ship out their overpriced defensemen who are taking up way too much of their salary cap. Get rid of OEL as soon as possible. I mean, he's no longer as good as he was, and his contract will hurt Vancouver in the future. But since no one's willing to get him, they have resorted to plan B, which is trading away Bo Horvat or Brock Boeser. And so for the Maple Leafs, as one of the best teams in the NHL, they are going all in this season. When it comes to trade targets, the Leafs should consider getting Horvat from the Canucks easily. He'd fit in seamlessly with Toronto's forwards and could and probably would make a significant impact in many different elements of the Leafs game. I personally think that Dubas has the urge and willing to get a trade done, and he has all the right pieces to do so. Let's see what happens in the near future. So let me know in the comments what you guys think about a trade for Horvat to Toronto would look like. Otherwise, thank you guys for tuning in and have a wonderful day.